Hi, Gabe. We're going to take a look at your 5 characteristics blog posting, offer some observations, tell you sort of what I'm seeing. So let's get right into it. Go to share on the screen mode here. And the first thing that I do here is just take an overview, see what kind of organization you've done here, whether you have all of the elements organized in a way that makes sense. As I'm looking at this, we want the 5 characteristics to be laid out in a logical order, which would be in the order that we have shot them. It's not arbitrary, even though we have that acronym of DITCH, ditch, it helps us understand or remember the characteristics. It also indicates the order in which we would address them. You're always going to be thinking about the direction of the key light first. Whether you're in the studio or whether you're outside, the sun is your key light. You're thinking about where you are and where the position of that first light is. And then you're working on the intensity, whether you need to augment it with a second light, and then moving down the list. Now, you don't necessarily have to deal with them in a linear way. Sometimes you're addressing them all at one time, but irregardless, you really are working with the direction sort of primarily, and then working through the other 4 sometimes simultaneously. So anyway, I am looking to see that you have them in somewhat of an order so that whoever is reviewing what you're doing can easily see that. So I see you do have everything there as far as positions. Intensity, yes, we have that one. And you have everything. Looks like your exposures are fine as well. I tend to look at that. We're moving down and you have temperature. We'll talk a little bit more about composition and when I get back into individual images. Looks good so far. You have the contrast and hardness. So you have all of these. It looks like also we went into color after you got into temperature. We'll talk about that as well, what happened there. Now, exposure. When I talk about exposure, we're just basically at this point talking about whether the images look overall light or dark. We didn't really control exposure. As you know, we're watching this video. We're working on the aesthetics and control project, which is about controlling the exposure. It's about using the controls on the camera and so on. So we'll have more to say about that in this next project. Here, I'm simply looking for relative lightness and darkness, whether the images look overall too light or overall too dark. And you look like you're right about in the middle. There's still some cases where things look a little brighter, a little dark, but we're not really emphasizing that. I am looking for use of the entire picture plane or use of the space. And it looks like you're doing a pretty good job, even when you're going with something that is relatively simple like this. The images, you're using the entire picture plane. In other words, you're using all of the space. You've just got the one bottle, but you are activating the entire picture plane by including these shadows. You've included this horizon line there very effectively. It's a little bit low, but I still think you've used it effectively. Low meaning I think we could have positioned it a little higher, lowered the camera and positioned it a little bit higher here. You would have created a bit less tension there. It would have created a little bit more of a harmonious balance there, but it was a good strategy. I think that's a good job. You're using all of the elements. Here again, this is an interesting strategy. You're almost creating a narrative here, believe it or not, where you've got this isolated element here, subject. Then we have this cast shadow working through these two. This is excellent. I think you're being very playful with it in a way, and you're almost getting into narrative storytelling with these as subjects. So you're working very well over here with it. With the content. A few of them feel a little bit forced. This doesn't quite feel as natural as something like this. This one feels like almost just like it belongs there, like everything seems to sort of click, whereas something like this feels a little bit like you're trying to make things work. not all of them are going to work. You have to experiment with stuff like this. Even though this one feels a bit forced, I applaud you for kind of working those things out. Keep working at this. Not all of them are going to work. Some of them work fantastically. Some of them are going to work like, didn't quite go. I say this one is, didn't quite go, but others are working for you very well. You can't make the ones that really go well without making ones that are sort of so-so. Identifying them and kind of continuing to shoot through them and not including them, that's going to be the key, where you're shooting enough where the ones that don't feel quite right, you don't have to end up posting. That's going to be the key for you. So moving in through here, with these shots, I started playing with focal length and depth of field. Okay, cool. Very good. Your use of light here is working out, where you're putting things into shadows and you're working out things into the background. You're creating what's called a atmospheric space or depth that way. It's very good. I like what you're doing in terms of experimentation and playing with how optics work with photography. Photography has some very unique ways of seeing. With intensity, same thing as the direction. You start off exactly the same. The difference is now you're adding that second fill light. The second fill light is never meant to compete with the first. So that's the first thing to consider when you start to add a second light, is to understand that second light is always meant to support the key. It's never meant to compete with the key. It's never meant to come up against it. It's always meant to just sort of like, hey, yeah, I'm here to help you out, but never to overwhelm. So anytime you're working with a fill light, you always still want to be very aware of of its intensity, of making sure that it does not get too bright and that it doesn't overwhelm or wash out. And I think what happened here is it got a little bright. You got a little too close with the two intensities, even though you can still see that one is brighter than the other. I think they got a little bit too close. Not all of them work out that way. I offer that not as a criticism, as a observation, because that's what we're figuring out. The reason to have you guys doing these exercises is to learn these things. It's so that you can discover the thresholds. You can discover what works and what doesn't work. I could just tell you all day long. I could just explain to you these things because I already have experimented with them as well. I've been working with photography for a long time, but it wouldn't help until you have experimented with themselves. And when you discover them on your own, then you own it. So with something like, for instance, here, where you're working a little bit more subtly, you've got the key light coming from over here. You got a fill that's coming from the side. You're balancing it a little bit better. Now the key light is your main source again. Whereas in the other one, the key and the fill were sort of, we're on equal footing almost, where you want to avoid that. So always remember that key light is the main source. The fill light is meant to support it. The same with different white balance. Yes, I can see that. They are the same with the different white balances. I like, in spirit, I think that's a good idea. In practice, I think we could have done the same thing with different compositions. Play around with compositions always. I would much rather see the different white balances with different compositions. Just do that. I would much rather see that in a posting. Not that you did anything necessarily wrong here. I think this is really healthy to kind of give yourself almost like a swatch, a sample swatch. If you're going to do that, make sure that to put all your settings here so that we know that you know how to reproduce these colors. But in the future, avoid posting the same photo over and over again, unless it's specifically outlined to do so. In the aesthetics and control that we're working on now, as you're seeing this video, we're working on that second project. There'll be a few that ask you to post what look like the same photo over and over again. That's by design. That's that's because the project itself wants you to be able to reproduce an exposure using different settings. So the image will look like it's the same image over and over, but that's by design, not in this case. you didn't do anything necessarily wrong because I did not highlight that. I think in the future, you're not the only student that did this part this way. And so I think I'm going to change some of the instruction there to clarify that I'd rather have you explore a variety of compositions rather than moving through. That said, you've got some swatches here. You definitely have some possibilities in terms of what's going on with your choices in color, which is what that part of it's all about. Introducing you to white balance on your camera, introducing you to how that corresponds to the color temperatures on the lighting, and how you can generate different color shifts and color balances. Contrast. Now, the reflecting card is really going to be a tool that I would encourage you to use all the time. I mean, everybody to use all the time. The reflecting card is a tool that is so simple, but is so useful. It's something that you just want to have always, keep one around. And when I say keep one around, it's just basically, a piece of foam core in your studio, or keeping a piece of card stock in the back of your trunk when you want to go on location to do a photo, anything. It really is one of those tools that you don't want to be without. And a reflecting can be any surface, really. It doesn't have to be a white card. It could be, as I demonstrated, that silver material. It could also be color. If you're working in color, you could have a red reflecting card or a blue reflecting card. And what would happen is you would be reflecting color into the scene. You would be reflecting a tone into the scene. If you had a gold card or a silver card or a copper, you would be reflecting those warm tones into the scene. So reflection is not adding intensity like we added a fill light. Reflection gathers the light that you already have and redirects it. When you're outside and working with the sun as your key light, reflection is really your main way to adjust and to control. In a couple of exercises, I think after, if my memory is serving, the project we do after the aesthetics and control, the one we're working on now, the one after that, we're going to be working on location outside. And so you're going to be using and wanting to use some reflection cards out there. You're going to want to bring some of these things out there for you to be able to add and to control a little bit of the lighting. So that's what this project's all about, is to experiment and control that. And I can see from your description, which I think is cool. I like that you are giving a little bit of a sort of a side note as to what you're attempting to do here. I think that's a really good idea. You can see here what you're doing. You're adding that little bit of light. There's a big difference between what you're getting here with this bottle than if you were to turn a light on. And I think you would agree. I mean, you had something like this on your intensity, and it totally changes it. Intensity would have been brightening this up, and your shadow would have been somewhere here. But with the reflecting card, it's so subtle. It's a much different look to what you're getting. Now, compositionally, I think you're starting to sort of, I don't know, get tired of the bottles or something. Up here, you were really kind of playing around and doing some cool things with the bottles. By the time you get down here, I think you were sort of you were kind of over making images of the bottles. But so I want to encourage you to keep working at it. Not get fed up with your subjects. You got to power through them sometimes, because when you're working, especially if you're ever doing this, for a commission or something like that, you're shooting for days and days, sometimes not. Sometimes you're in there and you're out of there. But there are times when you're working with a subject for a long time and you just have to keep the energy up. And so it does look like you kind of ran out of steam on interest with it, because you were at the beginning, you were really getting inventive, and now by the end here, you're just sort of, I'm going to put these up here. At least that's what it looks like. I don't know, maybe not. But I mean, an image like this, you're not really putting too much effort in in the composition here. Your background's kind of wrinkly, and it's sort of, there's a big difference between what you're doing here and what you've done here. There's a huge difference between these two images in terms of your attention to the image. So I would just encourage you to hang in there as you're shooting. Don't lose your energy by the end and wind up with images that don't reflect your ability to control things, because this isn't. I think you demonstrated that you're able to make images that are compositionally more exciting than this. Diffusion. Now, not everybody understands the value of diffusing the light at first, but especially once you get into doing things like portraiture, diffusion is really important, because what it does is it controls the shadows and how the shadows modulate from the deepness of them and how they modulate back into the highlight area. When you're working with portraits, a diffuse light source, it cuts all of the sort of angles off of the face. And so a diffuse light source is almost always used when lighting a face. Anytime you're looking to create a more organic or natural looking lighting, unassuming looking lighting, diffusion is the way to go. Mixing diffusion on the key light, having a key light that's diffused and a fill light that is not diffused. So a really small, sort of delicate fill light that is not diffused, and then a very bright diffused key light. Very beautiful a combination, because it gives you these lovely highlights that are crisp, yet you have this kind of warm cast over the whole scene using the fill. Again, your compositions are sort of getting a little bit more lackluster. I can see here you're including like elements in the background here that are not really included necessary in the composition. You're just basically, I think, running out of energy toward the end here to pay close attention to the details of your composition as well. So make sure that you're, hopefully you can hold your attention toward the end on this aesthetics and control. Maybe the bones are a little more interesting. You can keep the energy up all the way through the end on that. So that is what I have just in terms of these observations. I think you did an excellent job. Clearly, I've given you some encouragement there to hold on to the compositional energy all the way through the end. But I think your photography has a lot of potential. And I really look forward to seeing all of the things that you're going to be doing for the rest of the semester. So we'll see you in the studio. And all right. That'll be that. Oh, by the way, I will be issuing a grade forms and stuff like that. I have little index cards to offer for you like that. So, all right, that'll be it. I'll see you later. Bye-bye now.